Gold records, sold-out arenas, names that defined an entire era of American music. Then the industry moved on and left them with nothing. Today we're counting down 10 R&B legends who went from the biggest stages in the world to fighting for survival. Every story here is real and documented. Let's get into it. 10. Little Jimmy Scott. If you've never heard of Little Jimmy Scott, that is precisely the point of this story. In 1950, Jimmy was singing lead vocals with the Lionel Hampton Orchestra, one of the most celebrated big bands in America. His ballad, Everybody's Somebody's Fool, climbed into the R&B top 10, and his voice was already turning heads everywhere he went. Billie Holiday called him one of the most gifted vocalists she'd ever heard. Ray Charles said the same. Eventually, Charles brought Jimmy into his own label, Tangerine Records, and produced an entire album around that extraordinary voice. Somebody's fool. It was called Falling in Love is Wonderful. Recorded in 1963, it was a stunning achievement. Critics who heard advance copies were calling it a masterpiece before it even hit shelves. Y'all have to answer. Then something happened that would set the tone for the next 3 decades of Jimmy's life. His old label, Savoy Records, claimed he was still under contract and went to court to block the album from being sold. The courts sided with Savoy. The Ray Charles album was pulled from stores almost immediately after release. Jimmy Scott got nothing. Not the exposure, not the money, not the career boost that album should have given him. He went back to Cleveland, and because he had a family to feed and bills to pay, he did what people do when the music stops. He got a job. For over 25 years, Little Jimmy Scott worked as a hotel shipping clerk at the Sheraton in Cleveland. The man Billie Holiday had praised. The man Ray Charles had personally produced. Packing boxes in a back room of a hotel, he also worked as an elevator operator. He worked as a caretaker for his ailing father. Survival, day after day, far from any stage. Beautiful to watch love begin. He came back to music in 1989, performing at songwriter Doc Pomus's funeral, where Seymour Stein of Sire Records heard him sing and immediately signed him. His 1992 comeback album, All the Way, was nominated for a Grammy. He appeared on Twin Peaks' final episode, singing Sycamore Trees in a scene that moved David Lynch to tears. The world finally caught up with a voice it had abandoned for a quarter century. 9. James Carr. We have to pay for. In 1966, a Memphis singer named James Carr recorded a song called The Dark End of the Street for a small independent label called Gold Wax Records. Music critics who have spent their lives analyzing Southern soul have called that recording one of the greatest soul performances ever captured on tape. It reached number 10 on the R&B chart and crossed over to the pop chart. It has since been covered by Aretha Franklin, Linda Ronstadt, Percy Sledge, Graham Parsons, and dozens more, every one of them chasing something in Carr's original that they could feel but never quite replicate. No, it's wrong. Oh. That voice came from a man who was fighting a private war most people around him didn't fully understand. James Carr suffered from severe bipolar disorder at a time when mental illness in the black community in the South was almost entirely untreated and deeply stigmatized. They're gonna find us. They're gonna find. When the label that made his career, Gold Wax Records, closed in 1969, James Carr had no contract, no income, and no safety net. His mental illness made consistent performing almost impossible. There were years where he simply disappeared. Colleagues looking for him couldn't find him. When British journalist Andy Kershaw traveled to Memphis in 1987 specifically to locate James Carr, he had to search for hours before finally finding him, living quietly with his sister in a poor area of the city, far from any stage or studio. To the dark end of the The man critics had publicly labeled the world's greatest soul singer was lodging in poverty, largely forgotten by everyone outside of a small group of serious soul music historians.
They're gonna ban love.
A renewed interest in his work, sparked in part by Peter Guralnick's 1986 book, Sweet Soul Music, eventually coaxed him back into the spotlight. He performed at the Porretta Soul Festival in Italy. He recorded new material. He played his first New York show in 25 years in 1992 at a club called Tramps. Audiences who discovered him for the first time were stunned to learn this voice had existed at all. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in the mid-1990s and died in a Memphis nursing home on January 7, 2001. He was 58 years old. 8. Mary Wells.
I'm sticking to my guy like a snap.
Mary Wells was Motown's first star, before the Supremes, before Marvin Gaye had his own hits, before any of those names were household names nationally. Berry Gordy pointed at Mary Wells and said, "This is the sound we're building." And it worked. Under the guidance of Smokey Robinson, Mary delivered hit after hit. The One Who Really Loves You, Two Lovers, You Beat Me to the Punch, and finally, in 1964, My Guy, the first #1 hit in Motown history. The Beatles named her their favorite American singer and personally invited her to tour the UK with them. Then her husband convinced her she wasn't being paid enough and persuaded her to sue Motown and leave the label. She won the lawsuit and got out of her contract. But without Smokey Robinson producing her and Motown behind her, she quickly discovered how much of her success had been built by that infrastructure. She signed with 20th Century Fox, then Atlantic, then 7 more labels over the next 2.5 decades. Nothing stuck, nothing came close. By the late 1980s, she was performing oldies circuits to survive, and her voice was getting weaker without explanation. In 1990, doctors discovered the reason. Mary Wells had cancer of the larynx. She had been a heavy smoker most of her adult life, and the disease was already advanced. She had no health insurance. She had no savings left. The treatments were brutal, expensive, and consumed the last of everything she had.
Stick together, I'm telling you from the start, I can't be told.
Then came the final blow. With no income and mounting medical debt, Mary Wells was evicted from the apartment she shared with her daughter. She was placed in a charity ward for treatment. One of the founding artists of Motown Records, a woman who had once opened for the Beatles, was in a charity hospital bed with no money and no home.
My God. No.
When the news of her situation spread through the music industry, Smokey Robinson, Berry Gordy, Diana Ross, Rod Stewart, Bruce Springsteen, and Bonnie Raitt organized a fundraising effort that raised roughly $125,000 to help pay her bills. She even appeared before a United States congressional committee to testify about the need for cancer research funding, speaking in barely a whisper because the disease had already taken her singing voice. Mary Wells died on July 26, 1992. She was 49 years old. Smokey Robinson delivered her eulogy.
My God. Tell me more.
7. Ike Turner. You can have a genuine debate about who made the first rock and roll record, but Ike Turner's claim is as strong as anyone's. His Kings of Rhythm recorded Rocket 88 in 1951, a song so ahead of its time that Sam Phillips himself brought it to Chess Records and helped make it one of the foundational recordings in the story of American popular music. Over the following 2 decades, Ike built an empire around the Ike and Tina Turner Revue. They played arenas, they opened for the Rolling Stones multiple times, they recorded classics that still get played today. Ike was a genuinely brilliant musician, bandleader, and producer. He was also, by the accounts of Tina Turner and virtually everyone around him, extremely controlling, violent, and deeply addicted to cocaine. When Tina finally walked away from the marriage in July 1976, bleeding and broke, with 36 cents in her pocket, the legal fallout from their divorce stripped Ike of assets, concert revenue deals, and apartment buildings he'd owned. And instead of rebuilding, he accelerated the self-destruction. His recording studio in Los Angeles was destroyed by a fire. Drug charges piled up. In 1980, a SWAT team raided his home and found him hovering over a toilet, surrounded by cocaine. By 1989, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison on cocaine charges. When he was released from prison, investigative journalist Ed Kirsch tracked him down for Spin magazine and found him on the streets of Los Angeles, homeless, totally broke, and recently out of prison. The Spin article, published in 1985, laid out a portrait of a man who had once held extraordinary influence in American music, now surviving with nothing. Ike eventually got clean in prison. He found his way back to performing in the late 1990s. He won a Grammy Award in 2007 for a blues album. He died in December 2007 at age 76. But for years between his peak and his recovery, one of the most significant figures in the history of American music was sleeping rough in Los Angeles, broke and unsheltered. 6. David Ruffin. From 1964 to 1968, the sound of the Temptations was the sound of David Ruffin. My Girl, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, I Wish It Would Rain, Beauty Is Only Skin Deep. He brought a gospel-bred grit to those songs that no one else in the group could replicate, and he knew it, which eventually became part of the problem. By 1968, Ruffin was demanding the group be renamed David Ruffin and the Temptations, missing rehearsals, missing shows, and showing up to recording sessions clearly affected by cocaine. Otis Williams fired him, and the solo career that followed never matched the height of his Temptations' years, despite early promise. The 1980s brought a federal indictment for tax evasion. More than $300,000 in unpaid taxes. He served time in a federal penitentiary. In 1988, he was arrested in Detroit during a crack cocaine sting. In court, after that 1988 arrest, David Ruffin told the judge that he was penniless. He said the only place he had to stay was a mobile home parked behind an unfinished building in rural Green Oak Township outside Detroit, a home that didn't even belong to him. It belonged to a friend. Around the mobile home sat the skeleton of an old Cadillac. A Detroit Free Press reporter who went out to see the situation described it as a scene of total desolation. The man who had once been ferried around Detroit in a mink-lined limousine was living in a borrowed trailer in the woods. He was still doing reunion shows with former Temptations Eddie Kendricks and Dennis Edwards through the late 1980s and into 1991. He had just returned from a successful British tour when, on June 1, 1991, he collapsed in a crack house in West Philadelphia and was driven unconscious to the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. When the emergency room staff looked in the back of the limousine, they found a tall, gaunt, unidentified man with no ID and $53 in his pockets. They tagged him John Doe. His fingerprints had to be sent to the FBI to confirm who he was. David Ruffin, one of the greatest soul singers in Motown history, died as a John Doe. He was 50 years old. Michael Jackson paid for his funeral. Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. 5. Paul Williams. Most people know David Ruffin as the face of the Temptations, but the man who was there from the very beginning, the original founding member who helped bring the group together in Detroit in 1960, was Paul Williams. It was Paul who was there through the early lean years, before My Girl and the Fame. His baritone anchored the original sound of the Temptations, and his stage presence was a genuine force. He was also the one who helped choreograph those signature synchronized dance moves that made the Temptations' live performances unlike anything else in Motown's lineup. But through the 1960s, Paul Williams developed a severe drinking problem. Friends and bandmates later described it as alcoholism that grew more consuming every year. He was also dealing with a painful sickle cell anemia condition that made even standing on stage a physical challenge as the decade wore on. By 1971, Paul Williams could no longer reliably perform with the group. His drinking had advanced to a point where his health was visibly failing. Otis Williams made the decision to let him go, firing one of the group's original founders from the group he had helped create. The Temptations quietly settled a financial arrangement with him, reportedly paying him a small weekly stipend. But Paul's share of the Temptations' royalties and earnings remained a source of unresolved bitterness and legal uncertainty. With no active career, declining health, and the weight of losing everything he'd built, Paul Williams' life deteriorated rapidly in the 2 years after his dismissal. On August 17, 1973, Paul Williams was found shot to death in his car in a parking lot near his home in Detroit. He was 34 years old. The death was ruled a suicide. He left behind a wife and children. He left behind no real estate, no substantial savings, and royalty rights that remained tangled for years afterward. The man who co-founded one of the most successful groups in Motown history was 34 years old, broke, and gone in a Detroit parking lot. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a founding Temptation in 1989, 16 years after his death, without ever knowing the recognition was coming. 4. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack grew up sharing a bed with 4 brothers in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Cleveland slums. His family was so poor, he later recalled, that they shared their apartment with rats, and the rats didn't bother them because both sides had made a kind of peace with the other's existence.
10th Street, pimps trying to make them.
Out of that beginning, Bobby built one of the most extraordinary careers in soul music. He wrote "It's All Over Now" with his brothers, a song the Rolling Stones covered in 1964, making it their first #1 hit in the UK. He became Sam Cooke's guitarist and protege. He wrote songs for Wilson Pickett. He recorded classic soul albums through the early 1970s, Communication, Understanding, and the soundtrack to Across 110th Street, that are still considered benchmarks of the genre. He was also, by his own admission in a 1984 Rolling Stone interview, destroying himself. He was blowing through cocaine constantly, drinking, staying awake for 7 and 8 days at a time. His words, "Me and Sly Stone were running partners. I was really off into the drugs."
City you find the same thing going down.
The highs and lows of Bobby's career tracked almost exactly with his substance use. His 1981 hit, "If You Think You're Lonely Now," was a genuine comeback. His 1985 duet with Patti LaBelle gave him another breath of air, but the debts kept accumulating.
110th Street is a hell of a tester.
By the time Bobby Womack died on June 27, 2014, his widow Regina filed court documents in Los Angeles that told a devastating story. Bobby left behind $250,000 in unpaid child support, an unpaid loan of $400,000, total personal assets, one old 1974 Buick and some jewelry, valued at $7,250. The total debt his family inherited was over $650,000. His music rights were estimated at around $350,000, meaning even his legacy couldn't cover what he owed.
The family on the
The man who wrote the Rolling Stones' first UK #1. The man inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009. $7,250 left behind.
city you find the same thing going down.
3. Tina Turner. On the night of July 1st, 1976, after Ike Turner beat her badly in the back of their limousine on the way to a concert in Dallas, Tina Turner made a decision. She slipped out of a hotel, ran across a highway, nearly getting hit by a truck, and walked into a Ramada Inn on the other side of the road. She asked the front desk for a room. In her pocket was 36 cents. That was everything she had. The clerk gave her a room anyway. The next morning, a friend bought her a plane ticket to Los Angeles. She filed for divorce from Ike Turner, and in the settlement she asked for nothing. No houses, no cars, no back royalties, no piece of the empire they had built together. She took only one thing, the name Tina Turner. What she didn't take, and didn't know she was leaving with, was debt. Because Ike's financial mismanagement had left them owing money to concert promoters for canceled shows, Tina discovered she was responsible for something approaching $500,000 in unpaid obligations to venues and promoters who had booked the Ike and Tina Turner review and then never seen them show up. To pay those debts without any savings, Tina did the only thing she knew how to do. She performed. Small venues, hotels, Las Vegas lounges, anywhere that would book her, for whatever they would pay. Some weeks, she was singing 4 and 5 nights in a row in casino lounges, splitting whatever they offered between her bills and her rent, with virtually nothing left over. She was borrowing money to survive while working every possible hour to pay back debts she hadn't created. It took years. The comeback is now the famous part. Private Dancer, in 1984. What's Love Got to Do with It? The world tour, the stadium shows, everything that came after. But for nearly 8 years between walking out of that Ramada Inn with 36 cents and becoming the biggest solo touring act in the world, Tina Turner was performing in hotel lounges to keep creditors from her door. 2. Sly Stone. In his prime, Sly Stone didn't just make great music, he changed American music. Sly and the Family Stone integrated soul, funk, rock, and psychedelia in a way that had never been done before, and the records they made between 1967 and 1973, Everyday People, Family Affair, Thank You, Falletin' Me Be Mice Elf Agent, are still as inventive and alive as anything recorded in that era. He also had a mansion at 783 Bel Air Road in Beverly Hills that had previously belonged to John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas. He threw parties so legendary that stories about them became part of Los Angeles musical mythology. Then came the cocaine. Then came the PCP. Then came the paranoia and the missed shows and the erratic behavior and the retreating from public life. Then came the financial chaos, record company disputes, manager disputes, royalty disputes, a catastrophic decision to sell his publishing rights to Michael Jackson in 1984 for a reported $1 million, meaning he no longer owned a piece of the songs he had written. By 2009, a Dutch documentary filmmaker named Willem Alkema, following Sly Stone's story for a film called Coming Back for More, reported that Sly had been cut off from his royalty payments by his former manager following a dispute. Sly sued that manager for $50 million in 2010, alleging fraud and 20 years of stolen royalty payments. But the lawsuit hadn't paid out yet. And in September 2011, Alkema wrote in the New York Post that Sly Stone was homeless and living out of a white camper van with Pleasure Way written on the side. The van was parked on a residential street in the Crenshaw neighborhood of Los Angeles, a retired couple nearby, making sure he ate once a day and letting him shower at their house. Their son drove him when he needed to go somewhere. Inside the van, Sly Stone was still making music on a laptop computer, recording hundreds of new tracks that he kept to himself because he no longer trusted anyone in the music industry enough to release them. A Los Angeles jury ruled in his favor in 2015, awarding him $5 million, though that decision was later overturned on appeal. Questlove directed a documentary about his life, Sly Lives, aka The Burden of Black Genius, released in 2025. Sly Stone died not long after completing his memoir. 1. Eddie Kendricks. Eddie Kendricks was there before there were Temptations. He and his best friend Paul Williams came up from Birmingham, Alabama together in the late 1950s, forming the Primes, the group that, when combined with members of the Distance in Detroit, eventually became the Temptations. Eddie was the first one to sign with Motown. He arranged the harmonies. He managed the wardrobe. His distinctive soaring falsetto opened the door for every hit the Temptations made in those first years. The Way You Do the Things You Do, Get Ready, and the song that might define the entire Motown era, Just My Imagination, Running Away With Me. His 1973 solo hit, Keep On Truckin', made him, briefly, the only former Temptation to score a #1 hit in the U.S. as a solo artist. Just my imagination. By the late 1970s, the hits had dried up. The IRS had begun examining his finances, and what they found was a catastrophe. Eddie owed over $1 million in back taxes. With no significant income coming in from record sales or major touring, the debt became crushing. During the 1982 Temptations reunion tour, he was reportedly missing shows, partly due to cocaine use, partly due to a health issue that had been quietly developing for years. A physician discovered what they described as a pin drop of cancer on one of his lungs during an examination around that time. Eddie reportedly refused chemotherapy, fearing he would lose his hair. He kept performing small shows, reunion gigs with David Ruffin and Dennis Edwards, a well-received Apollo Theater concert with Hall & Oates in 1985. The music was still there, but the financial foundation was gone. By the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, Eddie Kendricks was performing wherever he could book dates, with essentially no financial safety net beneath him. He had returned to Birmingham, the city he had left decades earlier chasing music, with debts, deteriorating health, and a lung cancer that had quietly advanced while he kept pushing through shows. Eddie Kendricks died on October 5, 1992, in Birmingham, Alabama. He was 52 years old. The lung cancer that had been detected years earlier had finally won. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a Temptation in 1989, 3 years before his death. So at least he knew that recognition had come. But the founding co-creator of one of the most celebrated groups in music history died broke, back in the city he started from, with nothing left. The same year he died, his long-running IRS debt dispute was still unresolved.